Black men like Booker T. Washington, Martin Delany, and Marcus Garvey preached and put into practice the only thing that matters: economics and all that it entails. The movements created by these men served to galvanize support for a black-controlled industrial movement. Delany and Booker T for agricultural and trade-based education, since this was right around the time of the Industrial Revolution reaching its zenith, and blacks had many skills from slavery: carpentry, blacksmithing, plumbing, and many other things, because the slave masters used them for myriad tasks. And since they were free, they had a lot of guys, tons of labor skills, and nothing to do with them, which is why the white supremacists locked them out, brought Germans over, and had them teach the white supremacists how to do these things on their own to lock blacks out. And that's where men like Booker T. Washington came into play. And when Marcus Garvey saw what he did, he immediately got into contact with him, because he'd been all over the world and he'd seen that blacks weren't really doing shit anywhere. Colonization had blacks completely stagnant. And by the time he'd gotten to New York City, 100 years ago, he saw exactly what I see to this day. I mean, sure, it's a little better, I guess, but it's nothing compared to what blacks could have done if they controlled everything themselves and had their own economic community. Their own economic base. Which is why Marcus Garvey was for trade, politics, industry, military force to protect it. That's pivotal. These are the things that give a group power, respect, dignity, and a better quality of life. You see, he didn't just have his newspapers. He didn't just have the Black Star Line. He didn't just connect black farmers to black stores in cities like Minneapolis, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Chicago. He didn't just do those things. He knew that blacks in these small towns and in rural areas, he knew that these blacks in some of these cities were getting harmed by the Ku Klux Klan. He'd come there right around the time, right after the race war of 1919. So he knew what they were doing. And so he galvanized a lot. He got together a lot of these black soldiers who got military training. And he essentially did what the white supremacists were afraid of. He organized these men into a group called the African Legion to protect black families from the transgressions of the white race. They were going around lynching people, burning entire families, and then taking pictures and having a little party around the death of these people, who were usually innocents. Every once in a while they'd hang a criminal, but a lot of times they would just hang an entire family. They would hang guys who were going around tallying up voters. They would go around killing farmers who produced a lot of product. Basically, anybody that was any sort of a threat economically, politically, they would just take these people out, take out their entire families. And so the African Legion crunched up and cleared the border. So many Klansmen and Black Legion members, Black Legion was another white supremacist group, that they called a truce and called together Marcus Garvey and his guys to organize a truce. That's what physical and political might get you. Nowadays, if there was a group like that, blacks would be screwed. And will become anywhere close to that, you got guys like Jeff Sessions, who goes around rounding up black men for defending themselves against white supremacist tyranny. Now, you see, that just shows you that economic might and the military strength it spurs leads to technical innovation. You see, That's because when you fight long enough, you're gonna need strategy. You're gonna have to get better weapons because it's never gonna stop. The white supremacist knows that. That's why he holds dear the Second Amendment, and that's why they're constantly developing weapons. But in peacetime, and I use that in quotes, they have a lot of other uses for the things they create in the military. Water filters, different types of mass production units, yada yada yada. Anyway, the point is you have to create an economic base. The economic base is what will allow you to protect yourselves physically from not only white supremacists, but the nukes in your own neighborhoods. By neutralizing the nukes, the ghetto hood rat nukes, you can build a strong cultural base. And with a strong cultural base, you can create a patriarchy, a solid patriarchy, as a cultural aspect, and not just something that's done by men with just strong family will. And see, that's my problem with these fake black leaders. All of them. Du Bois, Michael King Jr., Moten, contemporaries like Al Sharpton, who just sold the rights of his pathetic life story to himself for $500,000. Or Jesse Jackass Johnson, Lewis Walcott. These people don't give a rat's ass about blacks. They don't want blacks to succeed in anything. These people are leeches. They're nothing but trash propped up by the white supremacist oligarchy to control the black community by preventing a galvanized agenda from forming, strengthening the community, economic as well as physically. They do not want that at all, because that means they'd be out of jobs. All they do is collect grants and civil suit money on behalf of the state and the federal government, as well as corporations, similar to white supremacists in the past posing as abolitionists during slavery. Then you have these cowardly blacks who come with these horseshit stances talking about, I don't like Jesse Jackson because he separates people based on race and political lines. That's a soft shoe weasel position taken by coons to avoid directly addressing white supremacists. See, they don't like to challenge whites directly. They don't. They'll always come with some side angle nonsense. It's cowardice. You see, forget all that. Let the guy with the screwed up gap teeth sit. Race matters. And I don't give two shits about that nonsense. See, the reason why I don't like these white appointed fake black leaders is because they leech off of the black community and stagnate blacks with non-violence rhetoric when faced with violence, anti-black atrocities, or begging for work instead of creating an economic base. Look at companies like Ariel Investments. That's what blacks should strive for. Creating an empire from nothing. Or Michael Jordan, a man who took a shoe deal and turned it into an empire. Not shaking down companies to line your own pockets, at the expense of black suffering. You can see it doesn't pay off. These fake black leaders can't trust the white supremacists. Jesse's son rots in prison for something white politicians do all the time, and the favors he dialed in didn't do a damn thing to stop it. See, despite all their blathering, what are Al Sharpton and Lewis Walcott doing for blacks being displaced from their homes, priced out of their properties, or having them stolen via deceptive tactics, using asset forfeiture laws, or the current redlining tactics? They do nothing. The white supremacist has been using these sinister tactics for years. They created laws in 1949 to label black areas as slums or blighted communities so that they could tear them down. They take the homes, pay them pennies on the dollar, kick them out. Then they pave over, invest tons of money in it, and move in whites, later Asians, Hispanics, Africans, anyone other than them. The whole purpose of bringing immigrants here in the 60s was to nullify the black dollar once and for all. That's why Michael King Jr.'s silly ass poor people's boycott or whatever nonsense he was going to do wouldn't have worked. Because all that's going to happen is you'd have to spend your dollar somewhere. They've gutted your community of all of its economic systems. So you'd have to go to Asians. You'd have to go to the Mexicans. And these people are going to spend their money with the white supremacist oligarchs, as well as their own communities. So either way, your dollar is going to go right back into the mainstream economy, but it's not going to come back to you. And these fake black leaders will never, ever address these things. They'll never tell you the truth. But I'll tell you what these fake black leaders will do. See, when a black person's harmed, like when Eric Garner got choked out for standing in front of a store, allegedly selling loose cigarettes, even if he was, it doesn't matter, after breaking up a fight between two chicks, he gets choked to death by a white supremacist who's still out there. And then you have the man whose car broke down in Oklahoma. His hands are up, she shoots him in the head, point blank range, says he's on PCP. The blood test determines that's a lie. She's still alive. And the fake black leaders, they pop up for this kind of stuff. Michael Brown, a really big one. Shot for jaywalking. They said he was shot for cigars, but he paid for the cigars. Is it okay to shoot people for cigars now? I guess that's okay. So everybody came out there for that because everybody knew it was a lie. Just like the Slager case was a lie. And he almost got off. The fake black leaders, they come out in force for that kind of stuff. See, their whole purpose when these kind of things happen is to stop black people. See, when something happens that galvanizes blacks to take action against the perpetrators of anti-black transgressions, these clowns show up fast to calm your asses down and distort the narrative, protecting the perps from justice, from true justice, with absolutely no mention of what those people have done. But when it's something mundane like a stripper blowing a lacrosse team, and then getting mad because she didn't get enough tips, then somebody like All Out, he'll perk right up. If there's an ambulance chasing ass, He'll waddle his dehydrated, prune-looking ass down there, running his mouth, trying to get some money. He's a scumbag piece of crap. And anyone who follows him has no self-respect or dignity. Luckily, a lot of people have been waking up to these boule clowns. Like old Walcott. Old man Walcott, silly ass, loves to come out for the camera when some rappers have beef. And I've already talked about those weapons of mass distraction. We already know. Celebrities are tools of the government to push the narratives, whatever BS narrative it is. Usually something to do with the war drums. But that is what it is. Point is, he's a clown. He's never been a threat to the whites. He's only been a threat to black people. The Nation of Islam always kills progressive black leaders. They killed Malcolm Little. They killed Clarence Smith. That's what these guys do. But see, when the white supremacist kills innocent kids, like Tamir Rice, who was sitting on a park bench with a toy gun out in an open carry state, shot at point blank range, the Nation of Islam does nothing because, like I've said and proved, it's nothing but an FBI honey trap group created to round up politically active blacks, keep them under surveillance, and keep them stagnant. They've always had these silly groups out here doing crap like this. From the NAACP to the Urban League, the Boule, the ABC. The purpose of these groups, like I said, is to keep blacks stagnant. Now, when real black leaders come along, like Martin Delaney, for instance, the white supremacist gets on alert. See, Martin Delaney was a very interesting case. He was the son of a Yoruba princess. He knew exactly where he came from. His mother brought his father's freedom, and they instilled in him the knowledge of his past, his manhood, and his humanity. He realized slavery was complete horseshit from the time he was very young, when a lot of blacks had no idea. They figured that was just life. So he dedicated the majority of his life to ending slavery. So what he did at one point was he went to Africa. First he went to Liberia. He realized Liberia was run by a bunch of goddamn nukes. So he went back to his ancestral homeland. He went back to Yoruba land, and he negotiated with a lot of black leaders, a lot of Yoruba leaders, to get parcels of land. And then he got some freeman blacks from Liberia as well as the United States to agree to come there and build up the property, because Yoruba land was relatively developed for the time. And so they could grow things like sugar and cotton to compete with the United States. They had what's the word I'm looking for? They had negotiated enough land to do that, and they had enough manpower to do that. Then he went up to Scotland and Switzerland and a couple other European nations that he organized with to sell this cotton and the sugar to at cheaper prices. This could have had the effect of nullifying American slavery by putting out more cotton than they could, because the land was a lot more fertile, the manpower was cheaper, and the economic system was different, because this was before they got colonized. The unfortunate thing is, though, He went back to the United States to round up everybody, and he didn't realize that Robert Campbell, the guy that was with him, was a spy for the British. He was a Canadian who was a spy for the British. He reported everything because they went into the interior of Yorubaland. Yorubaland was pretty much unpenetrable, especially as the oil empire, and they had no idea how broken up it was and how fragmented. The Ibadan Confederacy was holding things together, but there were a couple of kings and a couple of princesses. Ijaye, I think, Ikiti, and I think they had problems with the Nukbe. These people were fighting. You had Abiyakuta was fighting. The Igbado were still fighting. And so the white supremacists came and they first annexed Lagos because he made treaties with Lagos. He made treaties with, I believe, Ijaye and New Oyo. I don't know exactly, but he organized treaties with these states for fertile land, and that's where the Europeans went. That's where the British went, and they immediately annexed Abeokuta, and they annexed Echo, Lagos, and nullified the treaties. And then they made it very, very, very hard for ex-slaves to start coming back, repatriating. The only ones they let come back were those from Brazil. People always say, "Well, Marcus Garvey," and we're going to talk about Marcus Garvey now. Marcus Garvey, he never went back to Africa. That's because he couldn't go back to Africa. Not only could he not go back to Africa, when he was in France, he met with the Prince of the Dahomeyans, Tuvalu. They try to shit on his name now, but Tuvalu was able to rally up enough support to cause massive strikes all over Francophone West Africa because they were mistreating the blacks. And that put a halt to France's economy, which kind of relates to today. But I don't want to go into that right now. I want this video to be relatively timeless. He was able to put a halt to the entire Francophone economy just like that because of his lineage. And so the white supremacists, they lost their goddamn minds. They knew he was rolling with Garvey, so he couldn't go to French West Africa. There was no way in hell the British were going to let him go there. He was banned. See, that's how this works. See, they'll tell you you're equal, you're a good guy, whatever. As an individual, yeah, because you might have something to offer. You might be good in mathematics. You might be a smart technician. You might be a good laborer, whatever. They don't like black group economics at all. They don't like it. They don't want to deal with it. That's why they tore down Tulsa, Oklahoma, then labeled it blight and shoved a highway through it to finish it off. They did the same thing in Los Angeles. They did the same damn thing in Los Angeles. This is what these people do. They shut down black leaders. They sabotage them. The FBI admits that they sabotaged Marcus Garvey because they didn't want to, what do they say, a black messiah rising up, because essentially what the white supremacist believes is that blacks will create an economic base. They will free themselves physically. They won't be at the mercy of monsters anymore, and then they'll seek revenge on the white race. So whenever blacks create any real progress, not token gestures like the Civil Rights Act, which was a joke, it had nothing to do with blacks. It benefited, and I put that in quotes, everybody, mostly white women, and the immigrants that they brought over to nullify the black dollar. Anytime there's real black progress, they shut it down. See, like I said, the only reason blacks even got those concessions is because they realized that the crap that Michael King and the Big Six clowns were doing didn't work. So they took to the streets, they locked it in, and they started kicking so much ass. And this is just proof to the damage control guys, the white supremacist damage controllers, these are facts. They called in the military because they were fighting the cops. They were going blow for blow with the cops. That's what happened because when you disenfranchise people that much, and they know they're disenfranchised, and they don't have cell phones and TV to distract them from the fact that their lives are hideous and they have no real power. That's what set things off. That's what sets things off and makes things crazy and violent. And out of that came the strategy of giving blacks money. So in the late 60s, they started giving blacks all this money directly. It was a step in the right direction under the greater society for a small window of time. Because what happened was the money went to groups like the Black Panthers. And the Black Panthers were mostly students and local leaders. And what these guys would do, this is what they would actually do. They like to focus on the gun aspect. I'll go into that. Actually, I'm going to make an entire separate video about the gun thing. Because I hear a lot of this white supremacist nonsense about the liberals taking the guns and the Democratic plantation. So I'm going to go into a video about that later. But this is going to tie into something very important. When it comes to real black leadership, the Black Panthers took that money from the government, and yeah, they got guns, but what they actually got that was important was they started opening clinics. They worked with local doctors, like in Seattle, they worked with Odessa Brown, Carolyn Downs. They set up things where they offset heating payments, offset mortgage payments. They would come in and they would pull together money for subsidizing people's rent when they couldn't make their payments. This is stuff that helps offset poverty. This is why they came in there with the municipal disinvestment and basically destroyed the black community, like literally kicked them out, burned down their houses, burned down blocks, and were like, oh, well, we got to divert because they're just going to keep burning things down when it was the white supremacists burning down these places. So they would come in here, the Black Panthers, and they would offset this stuff. They would offset anything that would create a window for the white supremacists to come in and steal people's property. They would create things that would allow blacks to get health care. These were things that helped blacks live comfortable lives and pool the money that they had at the time. There was no crack epidemic. Outside of Chicago, there was no real thug culture. Maybe in parts of Mississippi where it came from, but there wasn't nothing like that. So these people had the time to build their wealth. And so they had these poor but thriving communities with black businesses serving all types of purposes. The downside was, though, just like what they were protesting in the 50s and 60s, is even though they were paying taxes for all this stuff, they were not getting the services that they were owed. They weren't paving the roads. They weren't fixing electricity. They weren't fixing the public plumbing. They weren't doing any of that. So these people were getting mad. And that led to the militancy. But overall, the Panthers were providing the services that the white supremacists were not giving to the blacks. And so they cut that money off. But by then, the Black Panthers were able to start pooling their own money. And that's when the FBI started getting involved. Because that was creating a real black patriarchy. See, guys like Willie P, they haven't really talked about that kind of stuff. And I don't think it's because he doesn't want to. I think he just hasn't really looked into it as much. And more than likely, it's because the white supremacists have been coming after him ever since he started talking about locking it in. But in terms of that, it was the patriarchy. These guys were creating a real patriarchy. Fred Hampton, for example. I'll talk about Fred Hampton. videos start disappearing because it wasn't that he was militant, it was that he was actually progressive. He was creating programs that would subsidize food costs. He created a quasi food stamp program for black people. And when he created that breakfast program for black children, that's when that white supremacist homosexual J. Edgar Hoover came in and killed him. Because he said that by creating a program that benefits children and gives them schooling and free breakfast, they would indoctrinate those children to be against the white race, which he wasn't. I would not be opposed to that, but that's not what his was about. And to the guy who thing is, when it comes to him, all he was doing was providing the services to blacks. All the Black Panthers were doing was providing services to blacks that the government denied them and still denied them to this day until white people move into the neighborhoods. You will see neighborhoods all over New York City. This is just New York. I see it in Ossining. I saw it in Trenton. It's all over the place to this goddamn day. And I'm going to make a video about that as well, because redlining has not stopped. They still devalue black neighborhoods regardless of their socioeconomic status. They still do not provide services to these neighborhoods, adequate services. That is by design. It is by design. And the Black Panthers, they filled that void. And when the government money stopped, they found other sources of income that were legal. So the FBI didn't like that and came in and they killed that man. He wasn't saying anything racist. He wasn't saying anything radical. He wasn't talking about, we got to kill whites, we got to do this, we got to stop the Mexican immigration, blah, 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 blah. No, he said, white power for the white man, black power for the black man. Let us do our thing. That's all he said. He ends up getting drugged. He ends up getting his house raided. They sent spies, nuke spies, to get the layout of his house, to get the operation systems of how his things worked, how his program worked. They went in there and they killed that man, shot him in his sleep, murdered his family, all because he benefited his community. If that doesn't tell you that these people are your enemy, I don't know what does. Because they did the same thing in Philadelphia in the 80s. Or excuse me, was it the early 90s, late 80s? Same thing. Whenever blacks create anything independent, a mass group, and they get on code and start creating a real, solid, enforceable patriarchy, the white supremacist comes in and kills those black leaders. They only want their fake, hand-picked head nignogs in charge. You gotta wake up and you gotta see these guys and you gotta nullify them. I'm not saying to physically harm these guys, because all that does is embolden the white supremacist oligarchs. What I'm saying is, you do not acknowledge these guys. You find any way to discredit them at every corner. You see a guy like Louis Walcott, discredit him at every corner. I got videos of Louis Walcott telling blacks to hate themselves. There's videos out there of Al Sharpton doing his crap. This guy he just signed his autobiography. He just sold his autobiography to his charity organization for $500,000. So he basically paid himself $500,000. Discredit these guys. Nullify any fake black leaders. These people are a disgrace to the community, and they are just robbing us blind and benefiting the white race. All they do is get paid off the pain and suffering of blacks who just suffer at the hands of the white supremacists. That's what these guys are here for. They serve literally no other purpose. None whatsoever. Anything that they do good is a token gesture, and when you read the fine print, the white supremacist oligarchs benefit in the end. I promise you that. And that's all I got to say, bitch.